All right, hey everybody, welcome back. Just getting things underway. Sorry, I'm plugging in my laptop right here. Okay, cool. Good to see you guys. Hope you're all doing really good. It's Monday, May the 4th. We're back here in class, about to start the live cast. Today and Wednesday, all we're trying to do is go over our study guides to get prepared for the final. So that's the goal, that's the plan. For today anyway, we're going to try and go over the first half of the semester topics one more time. So I would just say you've got to probably go back and retrieve the document from Titanium. It's been delivered. It was delivered to you guys on, I think it was March 4th. So if you want, go ahead, open up the file or take out your printed copy. And this will guide us through today's meeting, that first midterm review sheet. And then the other one that I sent to you guys earlier today, that's what we're going to use for Wednesday's review session. So we have 2 review sessions, today and Wednesday. Next week is the final. So that's really it. We're preparing ourselves to take the final. Okay. So we got about 4 minutes till class time, therefore I'm just kind of waiting. And we'll all be getting started in just a bit. Okay. Hey Walden, how are you? Good to see you. Anybody else that's here, arriving a few minutes before 1 o'clock, feel free to say hi. Let me see who's in the room. Little greetings, hello, little interaction. It's always just, it's good for everybody. So feel free to say hi. Hi, Walden. Hey, Eduardo. Hi, Leslie. Sammy, favorite, what flavor is this? Well, it's passion fruit. Today, that's on the menu. Hi, Priscilla, Peter. Good to see you guys. Cool. All right, good to have everybody in the room here that's showing up. Hi, Juliana. And we have a key meeting, so you guys are definitely in the best position to get your notes set and clear for the final. All right, just another minute, basically. Hey, Ai. Nice to see you. All right, just a few seconds. Okay, guys, well, I think it's pretty well 1 o'clock, so thanks again for being here. It's Monday, May 4th, one of our last class meetings, obviously, so what we have now is just one thing, and it's the final exam. I'm sure everybody knows and remembers that today was the due date for the current homework assignment, so definitely, if you hadn't already done so, make sure to email me that with no delay. As long as I have it today, you know, my ideal would be by class time. It's on time. If there's anybody struggling to submit it on time, you know, I could be a little bit flexible if it's turned in today. But once submissions arrive tomorrow and any later than that, there will be deduction for late credit for each additional day. So anyways, probably if you're watching this, you did submit it, and so not to worry. But if you haven't, just don't forget about it in the first place, and try your best to get it to me as soon as possible if you haven't already sent it in. Okay, so hopefully that's clear, you guys. Just don't forget that that homework is now to be given to me. And then we have our final exam, which is next Monday, Monday the 11th, from 1 to 2:50 p.m. So it starts at the same time as our normal class period, but you know how the final exams go. They're a little bit longer than a regular class meeting, so you have an hour and 50 minutes to complete the final exam. This week, we're just devoting ourselves to review for the final. We have 2 class periods today and Wednesday. I may also designate some additional bonus, like office hour type of optional time for you to get additional review, thinking maybe to do that later in the week, like Friday or so, but I'll announce it over Titanium when I'm ready to give you the time. And then maybe some people anyway that want to take that extra time could benefit from another, I don't know, hour or 30 minutes or something like that of discussion over the topics. Now, can any of you guys tell me that you did receive the attachment that I sent today? I sent earlier this morning a file through Titanium to the class. That was just for the final exam review guide. Did you guys notice that? Just making sure so I don't have to resend it. Okay, good, Priscilla. So thank you, and Peter and Sammy, yes. Anyway, this morning I delivered the study guide for the second half of the class. And that's what you should use to prepare yourself for the upcoming exam. Today, we're going to try and go over the first half of the review sheet again. So let me say this. If you don't have your copy of the first half of the midterm review sheet, you can easily go and locate it by opening up your browser. Yeah, sorry, let me just... Yeah, it's not an online class, but I don't know exactly who this one individual is. Let me quickly jump in there. And there we go. Cool. I don't know. Sometimes you got random people showing up to these meetings, but what can we do nowadays? We're going to do our review session. So I was trying to explain. If you go into Titanium and you open up the announcements tab, you'll find from March 4th the midterm review sheet. I know we went over it once before when we got ready for the midterm, but it's a cumulative test, and I'm going to ask certain questions off of that part of the list too. So today it's going to be like reviewing that one time again, and then Wednesday we'll take the time to go over the second sheet, which I just delivered this morning. Okay, so I don't know, are there any questions about all that? I graded the quiz, as I told you guys over the weekend. Some of you have sent me a request for your score. If you haven't and you want to know your score, just let me know anytime and I can deliver you your quiz score. I can send you comments if you really want. I could also provide you with your overall grade in the class and where you stand. So anybody looking for a grade check on any of the assignments, including the most recently submitted quiz, just let me know. Your homework that you guys turned in today, I'll be trying to get that finished, and I'll send the announcement when the grades are in for that. But it'll definitely be done this week, no later than the end of the week Friday, so everyone will be able to gain notice of all the grades they had so far in the class up till the final. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything about those general announcements that I neglected to mention, but I think that's pretty much it. So everyone, are you guys ready? Shall we get this going? I want us to do our midterm review now. So, well, final exam review, but the first installment is basically the same as what we did with the midterm review. So here on my phone, I have the document pulled up from the first half of class. You guys could look at the same document to guide you through the discussions that we're about to have now. So when I ask a question here, I want you to go back in your notes using your book, your notes, and your memory to try and see if you can give me the quick answer, okay? And once we get that answer, we're just gonna move on to the next and try and get through as many of these topics as we possibly can. Okay, so we began the course with chapter 8, which was all about argument and basic concepts of logic and critical thinking. Juliana, what is this message that you're sending to me? I don't understand why you would say that, but it looks as if I get it. Maybe there's another person who's trying to troll the meeting by creating an equivalent name to another student. Quick question there, Juliana. Do you know anything about that other person who tried to comment? I don't know why, you know, of course we get to the very last day, last week, and that's when you start seeing people trying to play games, but at any rate, what can we do? Sorry for that, Juliana. I know it wasn't you, but it was kind of a weird message to see from another person. Different identity they're trying to get to me, but it's fine. I don't know any of these people. Not to worry, Juliana, I fully understand. Internet trolls, people have no life, so what are they doing with their lives? Playing games. Okay, so the questions on the list. Let's get it started. When we look at chapter 8, question, what is a good or a bad critical thinker? What could that be? Tell me, and then once I see the note, I'll just move on. Good or a bad critical thinker? A good critical thinker is a person who is what? A good critical thinker, a person who, let's just see if you can tell me quickly, and then we can just get that piece of info on the table. If I see too long a delay, and it's seeming like it's taking you too long to get to your notes, I'll just help you out with it. But I'd like to see if we can make it as interactive as possible to get started. Okay, good, Walden. A good critical thinker is a person that would not believe claims unless they were based on or backed by good evidence or good arguments. So that's the notion of what is a good critical thinker. Also, when they make claims to other people, they don't just say things with having no basis. They try and provide good evidence or arguments to back their own claims. So good critical thinker. Won't believe claims unless backed by good arguments, and when making claims, provides arguments or evidence to support. Okay, so I put the definition there in the chat bar. On the other hand, bad critical thinker is just the contrary, so that should be obvious enough based on the definition of good. This is a person that will believe claims that are not based on good evidence. So a person that will believe claims that are not based on good evidence, and when making claims to others, does not provide supporting arguments. Okay. So there is our pair of quick definitions here. Good critical thinker won't believe claims unless backed is what it should say, as in the past tense, by good arguments, and when making claims provides arguments or evidence to support the claim. Bad critical thinker, a person that will believe claims that are not based on good evidence and when making claims to others does not provide supporting arguments. Okay, good. So moving to the next. What is an argument overall? It's a set of how many sentences? It is a set of a certain number or more of sentences. Just hit me with that definition if you could quickly say it. So we've learned about arguments really from day one. I'm just asking you one time to try and remember what the basic definition of an argument is. So it's a set of, let me know. It is at least two sentences where there is one conclusion and at least one premise. Exactly. Okay, good guys, Robert, Matt, and Michelle. So an argument, a set of two or more sentences with one conclusion and at least one premise. And basically, the conclusion of the argument is the claim that you're trying to prove to be true. And the premises of the argument are the statements which are the evidence that are supposed to support the conclusion. So again, okay, so there you go. And let's be clear about the different parts of the argument, what they are: conclusion, statement you are trying to prove to be true, and premises, evidence for the conclusion. Okay, good. So we're continuing to go through these notes. What's the definition of truth? If a statement is true, what does that mean? Say that I'm wearing glasses. True or false? It's true. But tell me, though, what it means for a sentence to be true. True means, what about the sentence? Has to do something with matching. That's right, Yayi. So it matches the facts of reality. That's what the concept of truth is. So truth, when what a, yes, exactly, guys, good. When it aligns with reality. So when what a sentence says matches the facts of reality. Okay, good. So like if somebody told you, I don't know, the coronavirus is totally like the flu, this is not true. It's much more deadly. It has a much higher mortality rate and all of that. So, you know, that would be a claim, but that's not really what the real world is like. A good critical thinker only wants to believe things that are true, because if you have false beliefs in your head, that means that you think something is a certain way, but that's not really how the world is. And so you're bound to act in a way that is out of order to the facts, and it's probably going to be to your disadvantage. So exactly, Jessica. A statement is true if what it asserts is the case. It's false if what it asserts is not the case in factual reality. Correct. Okay, good. So we're going ahead to the next definition. What is the definition of belief? What's a belief? A belief, it relates to the word truth, because to believe a sentence means to what? When one believes a sentence, this would mean that they blank. Like if you believe that, I don't know. Okay, good, Walden. When a person thinks a sentence is true, exactly. Walden, Peter, Jennifer. When a person thinks that some statement or sentence is true, then you agree with it. That means you believe it. Now, Jennifer, you say when you disagree with it. No, if you disagree with it, you don't believe it. So if I told you coronavirus is totally not dangerous, you would probably say, I don't believe that, meaning that you disagree with that statement and you don't think that represents the facts. When you do believe a sentence, that means that you think that it's correct. So if I told you that, you know, our final next week is Monday, I think you believe this because it's what I've reported and it's also what's indicated in the registrar's official schedule. Okay, good. So belief, when a person thinks that a statement or sentence is true. Okay. So, good. Got belief. Next up, I'm just asking you now, what are some conclusion indicator words? That should be pretty easy. So what are some words that are used to indicate that the conclusion is now about to be stated in an argument? Some popular examples of these conclusion indicator words. Just hit me with a few. I'm sure you remember that, so that'll take just a moment. Okay, conclusion indicator words. And let's see which ones you think of. Okay, good. Therefore, exactly, that's one of them. Not the word exactly. The word therefore is a conclusion indicator word. So along with therefore, there's also so, there is hence, there's thus, consequently, it follows that, ergo. So yes, good examples, guys, all around. Therefore, thus, hence, so, it follows that, consequently, and all of those. Exactly, as a result would also be fair. Okay, now, just on the other side of that kind of question, what are some premise indicator words? You could maybe tell me about those. So a premise indicator word is like, for example, words like what? These are words which indicate that you're about to hear a premise of an argument, not the conclusion, but the evidence statements. And so words of that kind are, yeah, given that, because, as shown by, since, due to the fact that, provided that, on account of, in as much as. So I've given you a bunch there, but correct, those are all fair examples. So in looking back on our review session, of course, since it's all archived and placed on YouTube, whatever I didn't have a chance perhaps to write down either on the board or type into the chat bar, you can clearly just review and take the time signature to the point in the notes where we went over the relevant concept, and you can hear my voice and take dictation if you need. Okay, so then the next thing in the questions talks about different types of sentences. So let's just, if we can, go over a few of them. What type of sentence is an imperative? An imperative sentence, it's just a sort of fancy grammar word for what kind of sentence? An imperative is a what? A command, exactly, yeah. So it's a command. If I told you, put away your books, as a professor might sometimes say in a classroom, that would be giving you direction. And so that is an imperative. If a person says, close the door, take out the trash, write this down, be quiet, some of these things are not so nice to say, but they're all in the realm of commands. And so they're all imperatives. Good. After that, an interrogative. What kind of sentence is an interrogative again? It's not a command, but instead it is a what? Yes, correct, Jennifer. So a interrogative is a question. Like if I speak and say, where's the bathroom? What is your name? How long is this movie? Do you have dessert? I don't know. There's a bunch of questions that anyone could ask, and that's all within the scope of interrogatives. Okay. Furthermore, what's an assertoric sentence? That is just a sentence that is either true or false. So it's just a sentence that has a truth value. Yes, declarative is the other synonymous label for assertoric sentences. That's correct, Jessica, yeah. So if I tell you that George Washington was the first president, that's an assertoric sentence because it is a true statement of fact. If I say Abraham Lincoln is the first president, this is also an assertion. It is just a false assertion. So statements which can be evaluated to either correctly or incorrectly correspond to reality are assertions, or as we say, declarative sentences. And those are important because that's the only kind of sentence that is ever used in a logical argument as a premise or as a conclusion. Okay, good. So thank you guys very much. Now I have to ask, what is a deductively valid argument? And let me just be totally clear, as I think I've said this before, but this is such an important question and concept in our class that I'm going to ask you that question on this final, with no doubt. I'm going to ask you that question, maybe right at the beginning. So just let me know, what is a deductively valid argument? What's the definition of deductively valid? It means what about the argument? I'll give you a hint. It starts with the word if. So a deductively valid argument is an argument where if what? If all the premises are true, the conclusion therefore must be true. Yes, exactly. Okay, good. So just hold your mind on to that definition. That's what deductive validity is. There are two main types of argument and logic. There's deduction and induction. With deduction, like we're speaking about, the whole thing is that if the premises of the argument are true, then the conclusion must be. So that's deductively valid. Jessica, you say it this way: a deductive argument is said to be valid if and only if it takes a form that makes it impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion nevertheless to be false. Exactly. So with deductively valid argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion can't be false. In other words, stated differently, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must necessarily be true as well. Okay, so all presidents were born in the United States. Barack Obama was the 44th president. Therefore, Barack Obama was born in the United States. A deductively valid argument, because given the premises being true, of course, the conclusion logically is a consequence of those premises. Okay, now, what is a sound argument? Okay, it's related to deductive validity, but it's a little bit extra. So a sound argument is a valid argument, but with the extra aspect that what? In order to be sound, it has to both be valid, but, and the key is the second claim, to be sound, it is overall valid, but on top of that, what makes it sound? Sound argument? Just know. To have a sound argument, an argument which is defined or classified as sound. Okay, Jessica, sound argument, an argument that is valid and whose premises are all true. Exactly, yes, correct. So the premises are true and the conclusion necessarily follows from them, making the conclusion true as well. Yes, the key aspect of the right definition is that when an argument is sound, the premises are all true, plus it's valid. Now that's important because there can be valid arguments that are not sound. Okay, so like if I told you, let's see, every human being has visited Mars. Elon Musk is a human being. Therefore, Elon Musk has visited Mars. That's a valid argument, but it's not sound because it makes a false claim in the first premise, which says every man, every human has visited Mars. Now, that's not actually, of course, true because to this day, no human has ever set foot on Mars. But if the premise was true, then by continuing to add a second premise, which just names one member of the human race, you would, of course, therefore have to conclude that that human had been to Mars, because why? Because all humans have been to Mars. Now, that is only under the hypothetical assumption that the premises are true. But of course, in reality, they're not both true. So that would be valid but not sound. What would be valid and sound? I don't know, like this. No human has been to Mars. Donald Trump is a human being, and therefore Donald Trump has not been to Mars. This is both valid and it is sound, because the conclusion logically follows from the premises. That's why it's valid. But it's sound also because, unlike in the previous case, this is an example of an argument which has got both true premises. It is true that no human has set foot on Mars. It is also true that Donald Trump is a human. So therefore, putting those two facts together, the conclusion does logically follow. And it's sound. Okay, so just giving you guys some thought about that particular question. Next. So inductive strength. An inductively strong argument. Now as we speak about deduction, what does it mean for an argument to be inductively strong? Not deductively valid, but the term is inductively strong. So it means, to set you up, well, Jessica, you know, I guess there have been claims about his skin color and stuff. I don't know if I should weigh in, but yeah, you know, he's the president one way or the other, and he's the human president, I suppose. So back to what I was saying, though. Yes, can you tell me, just a little bit of light humor, but can you tell me what the definition of inductive strength is? Yes. If all premises are true, then the conclusion is highly likely to be true. Okay, good, exactly, yeah. So with an inductively strong argument, the conclusion might not be true, even if the premises are, but it probably is, okay? So like, it has been warm in Fullerton every summer for the past, I don't know, 100 years, for as long as records have been kept. Therefore, there will be another warm summer this year, 2020. We're waiting still for the summer. I know it's right around the corner, but it hasn't happened yet. So what we're doing there is predicting the future based on the pattern that we have observed in the past. Will it probably be the same as that old pattern? Sure, but random exceptions can sometimes occur. So like, I don't know, the postman has delivered the mail to my post office box every day, Monday through Saturday, for as long as I've lived. Therefore, since tomorrow is Tuesday, he'll deliver the mail again. Can I count on that? I mean, probably, yes. But who knows if some kind of weird cataclysmic event would prevent the delivery of mail. I mean, I guess the COVID virus hasn't really stopped that, so it'd take a lot to shut down the postal service. But you understand, I'm giving you examples of arguments which are well based on the premises. The conclusion is well based on the premises, but it's not 100% absolutely certain. That's the difference between deduction and induction. Deduction is more like math. When you have 2 + 2, it's not like maybe it's 4. It has to be 4. With induction, though, we are making probable predictions. So if your car has never been stolen for all the time you've had it, probably it won't be stolen today, because the pattern establishes that that is rare and unlikely to happen. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. So induction gives us a probable conclusion. Deduction gives us a conclusion that is necessary if the premises are true. Okay, good. So we'll continue from there. Next up, disjunctive syllogism. The form of, so there's a couple of different forms of deductively valid argument that we all learned about. I believe we learned about 4. So yes, one of them is called the disjunctive syllogism, aka argument by elimination. Quickly, if you could just tell me, what is the argument by elimination? What is that? Argument from elimination, by elimination. It has the form which takes the either-or statement as the first premise, okay? So can you just retrieve from memory the example I'm trying to refer to? Disjunctive syllogism, anyone? Okay, no, not that, Eduardo. You're thinking of a different form. So we have to keep our concepts clear. This is not the right answer. What is disjunctive syllogism? Okay. So Walden, either A or B is the first premise, yes. Followed by not A. And so therefore, B. Keep in mind also that this is the standard format that you're supposed to write these arguments in, the conclusion falling at the bottom, with the premises given above, and a horizontal line that divides the two. Okay, either A or B, not A, so therefore B. Another possibility is either A or B, not B, so therefore A. And so it's really possible to have either conclusion depending on which premise is eliminated on the second line. Notice this though, and this is definitely important, it's not correct if you were to say either A or B and then affirm one of the disjuncts and then conclude with the denial of the alternative disjunct. That's not the way it goes. So it cannot say, for example, either A or B, A, and thus not B. No, the conclusion has to be an affirmatively stated one of those two disjuncts. And so the second line involves an elimination of one of the two. Okay, so that's disjunctive syllogism. Next up, to get into the next one of those, I'd like to ask you now about modus ponens. Modus ponens is another form of logical deductively valid argument. And let's just quickly go over that. The form of modus ponens, which I'm putting below. Who knows that? Modus ponens, sometimes called affirming the antecedent. So this is not a disjunctive syllogism. It's one of the hypothetical syllogisms, which there are 3 of them. What's modus ponens look like? Beginning with the first premise. All right, so what you have, well, you can use Google. I don't really care about that, but I mean, you need to still know the material. So whatever the case is, you're going to have to type it at least. So hopefully the memory kind of kicks in and puts it in your permanent memory, or at least your short-term memory while you're typing. You know, at the end of the day, Google will help you sometimes in life, but what are you going to do when you want to just have knowledge that you can think about on your own? You can't really always outsource it to the external world, because somebody has to discover the information, right? Who put it on Google in the first place? Maybe you in the future could do that if you actually learn it. Okay, so Fritchard, you're saying if A then B, A therefore B, and that's correct. That's modus ponens, and that is how that particular form of argument works. So it starts with the conditional, which says if A then B, proceeds from there to affirm the antecedent, and then the conclusion is the consequent. Let's keep in mind what type of sentence this one is on line 1. That's called a conditional or hypothetical statement. And inside of every conditional, there are 2 parts. There's the if part, which is called something, and then there's the then part, which is also called something. The if part, if A, that's the antecedent. The then part, then B, that is the consequent. So this is the breakdown of the little elements that compose a conditional statement. Okay, so that's modus ponens. Let's try and talk next about modus tollens, which has got some similarities to modus ponens in the sense that it uses a conditional, but the structure of it is a little different. Okay. Yeah, so modus tollens then. Modus tollens is, how does it go? Format. Modus tollens argument. What's the format of that? It's funny because, I mean, oh yeah, okay, if A then B, not B. You got the conclusion wrong though, Walden. Somebody help him out. Almost, but not quite. If A then B, fair enough. Not B, okay. But then therefore what? Not A. Okay, correct, good. So if A then B, not B, and so therefore not A. Like giving you English examples of each of the different kinds of case we've looked at so far. With disjunctive syllogism, I will either study for the final or I'll just Google. I'm not going to just Google, so therefore I'll study for the final. Modus ponens. If I just use Google, then I'm not going to get an A in the class. I just use Google, so therefore I'm not going to get an A in the class. Modus tollens. If I study, then I will get an A in the class. I did not get an A in the class, therefore I did not study. Okay, so I'm just giving you guys examples that you could use to plug in for A and B in the different cases that we've looked at. But of course, it's not limited to these examples, and a good logical mind is not going to over-rely on just the verbatim statements given by a professor and will be able to supply something of their own. Okay, so you say this. I have some bad news to, okay, so, well, Jessica, there's either some kind of misbehavior by an imposter or there isn't. Can you tell me which it is? Well, if you can't, then we'll have to talk about it at a future time during the remaining comments here. But it seems to me as if we got another one of those little issues. At any rate, I'll have to ignore it because it's not relevant. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the chain argument, okay? What is the format of a chain argument? Chain argument, what's that? if A then B, followed by if B then C. So therefore, conclusion, if A then C. That's right. So a chain argument is just a set of conditionals linked together in a chain format. So beginning with if A then B, proceeding to if B then C, and then concluding with the conclusion, which connects the first antecedent to the final consequent among the premises. So if I study, then I will pass. If I pass, then I will graduate. So if I study, then I will graduate. I don't know. That could be a possible example there. Okay. So let's move on to the next. Jessica, you're tripping me out, but I hope you're well, if for what it's worth. Okay, so we talked about the standard form of an argument. Good. So we can go on then to the next. Okay, so next up, Milgram Experiment. The Milgram. Which one was that, basically? And we all probably know the details, but just a word or two about which one was Milgram. Which one was that? Milgram study, social psychology experiment, gives us important information and insight into the value of critical thinking and the power of authority to control people's behavior. Exactly, Eduardo, it was the shock test one. So this was the experiment in which two people were brought in, and yeah, it's not real shocks, but the teacher thought they were real. They told the teacher person, when this other guy on the other side of the wall gets the memorization question wrong, you have to deliver this shock on the shock panel. And with each new wrong answer, increase the intensity of the voltage. Now, there were no actual shocks, but the person that taught, that was in the teacher position, they had thought it was real. And they were hearing all these screams and pleads to stop. But basically, the experimenter, the researcher, kept telling him, no, you got to continue. And so what we're really looking at in the test is the level of obedience that people would exhibit in deference to a perceived authority figure, even when the authority figure is asking them to do things that are clearly wrong. And it was disappointing because most people would have then actually followed the commands. So I don't know what's going on here with this one individual. Jessica. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's just your tone. It's, the fun and games of your tone. But it's hard to tell, because we already had one kind of person walking around as an imposter. But as long as you don't cross any lines, I guess I'll let you do it. Okay, so that was Milgram. Next question. What about the Zimbardo? What's the Zimbardo experiment? Am I obsessed with black? I'm not really. I mean, it's a nice neutral color. It looks okay on the camera. So I guess, I would have preferred, a little color pop on this wristwatch, but they didn't have the one that was red. So anyways, back to the list. Can you tell me what was Zimbardo? That was the prison experiment gone wrong, right? So that was the Stanford prison experiment, basically. In that experiment, they told people that they're going to put them in the role of prisoner or guard, and that they were supposed to run a prison simulation in the basement of Stanford University for 2 weeks, but it was cut short after just 6 days. Why? Because of the abusive and out of control behavior of the guards towards the prisoners. It showed that in the absence of oversight and given some measure of authority and perceived social support for what you're doing, people can easily lapse into poor behavior and even immoral conduct. So critical thinking helps to prevent and insulate against that too. Okay then, so stages of cognitive development. Okay, there was 3 of them that were mentioned by this psychologist and researcher. So the first of the 3 stages, or you could just say the 3 stages and then we could just briefly define them. Blank, blank, and blank. The stages in the critical thinking process. What do you think? Okay, dualism, relativism, commitment. Yes, correct. And I'll just briefly summarize them. Dualism is the first stage where a person basically believes that all truth is just black and white, and answers to all questions come from authority figures who cannot be challenged. So you don't really think that you have your own independent judgment. You just kind of defer to the counsels of perceived authority. The second phase is relativism, right? And that's the point where a person thinks that truth is just all personal opinion. There's no real objective facts. And since all of these opinions are equal, they should all be just regarded as equal and none of them judged. And then the third stage is commitment, where the individual believes that they can actually come to the correct conclusions about things based on their own judgment and the best available evidence. So they no longer just defer to others, but they also don't just think that there's no real facts. They think there are objective truths that can be learned through following evidence and using good judgment. Okay, now, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a person that only seeks out what kind of information. If you have confirmation bias, then you're only going to seek what type of info. Confirmation bias. The person has this bias, so it means when they go out and they look for facts or info, they selectively do that and they just look for what kind of facts or information. I don't know if I should say facts, but claims. Information that backs up what they believe. Correct, Robert. So it's the person who only looks for information that supports what they already do believe. So it's kind of a biased and selective way of trying to investigate a claim. Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. So then there's a bunch of qualities of good critical thinkers. So they're kind of bundled together in chapter 1. I'll just quickly talk about some of them since they're grouped closely together in the one question on the list. Analytical skills, the ability to provide logical support and reasons for your views instead of just having unfounded opinions. Effective communication, that's the ability to speak, write, and listen well. So speaking and writing well, listening carefully, also being aware of different communication styles. Then, inquiry skills. That's the ability to know how to collect and gather information or evidence for the purposes of doing research. Flexibility, that's the ability to be able to change your mind or plans and to be open to alternative and conflicting viewpoints, to just hear them out. Open-minded skepticism. So that is only believing things that can be proven with beyond some type of reasonable doubt, but still keeping an open mind to all views until such proof is obtained. The method of doubt. Okay, so that was discussed by the French philosopher René Descartes in the 17th century. And basically, the method of doubt says that you should assume to be false anything that could even possibly be doubted. So if something could be doubted, then you should just assume that it's false, instead of, for example, giving credibility or credence to things that remain skeptical or doubtful. And he thought that we should do that in order to discover what's true or what cannot be doubted. Okay, collaborative learning, that's pretty basic. It's just being able to work well with other people cooperatively to come up with shared solutions to common problems instead of just shutting people out and doing everything in a sort of standoffish, stubborn, independent way. Okay, and then creative problem solving. That's the ability to come up with creative solutions to complex problems, sometimes improvising them, in other cases having contingency plans that you've assessed and that you've provided in advance of a problem happening. Okay, like, I mean, I don't know, look at us. We're dealing with this big pandemic, right? And we probably could have done a lot better if we had had a little bit better contingency planning for this exact event. It's not like there weren't agencies that had this exact duty to perform, but either they were underfunded or not attended to properly, and now we have a much worse outbreak than we might have had if prudent planning and policy decisions had been made a little earlier, a little quicker. Okay, so yes, qualities of good critical thinkers, all of those. After that, the question is asked, why is critical thinking important for being a citizen in a democracy? And I mean, it's pretty straightforward also, which the book talked about. It's just because in a democracy like what we live in, the key feature of democracy is democratic elections where people have a chance to vote and thereby appoint the political leaders and therefore indirectly control the working of government and its policies. So if we're being asked as citizens to vote, then being a good critical thinker is valuable to that end, because it makes us more wise voters, better capable of making decisions that reflect our interests and the interests of our communities. So because it helps us vote and take issues into consideration when we make wise votes. All right. How can critical thinking benefit you in terms of making a rational life plan and assisting you with your self-esteem? So there was a brief discussion in chapter 1 about what some of the benefits of critical thinking are for you, and those were 2 of them. So it helps you to develop a rational plan of life, determining what your biggest goals are and what all the steps you will have to take in order to eventually achieve the big goals. So good critical thinkers are good at planning, including planning out your life, which you need to do if you want it to succeed. Also, it benefits you in terms of giving you more self-esteem and confidence, because good critical thinkers know that they can rely on their own judgment and abilities when there are problems to solve in life, as there always are. Okay. Now, after that, there was a question about the 3 steps of the critical thinking process. Maybe you could just remind me about the 3 steps there. Now we're not talking about the 3 levels of cognitive development, but instead the 3 levels of critical thinking. So what were the 3? Blank, blank, and blank. If you could quickly report those terms, and then I can just cover those briefly. So what are them? 3 stages. Yeah, experience, interpretation, and analysis, exactly. So first of all, you have an experience of events. Maybe something that happened to you or just something that you witnessed happening in general. At that first stage, you just note what the experience was, but you're not yet trying to interpret why it happened or explain why it happened. So you just the what of what happened is the experience level. After that, you get to the interpretation phase, which is when you start to ask the question, why though did it happen, and what is the explanation? So at interpretation, you try and provide an explanation or reason for why the event happened. Analysis then is when you go back and you reconsider that interpretation a second time. So you ask yourself, but is that the right analysis? Is that the right explanation of why it happened? And you allow yourself to consider different alternative explanations. Sometimes your first interpretation is a little bit biased or formed too hastily or formed because of an emotional overreaction to something. So that's why the analysis stage is key, because after you've had a little time and distance from the events, sometimes your second examination of the reasons why can be more accurate. Okay, so we go ahead from there. Obstacles to critical thinking. And there's also like a bundle of them from chapter 1. So quickly, a few of them include these things: avoidance, anger, cliche, denial, ignorance, conformity, and struggling. Okay, so avoidance is just avoiding people and ideas that disagree with your own views. So just trying to shut people out or cut them off if they're not on the same page with you in terms of what you believe. Another is egocentrism. Sorry, no, I'm looking below. I'll get to the egocentrism. But another is anger. Anger is simply an emotional negative reaction to a person who gives you information that disagrees with what you think. So instead of considering someone's ideas or argument, you just get mad at them for presenting it. Cliche is to use these overused common phrases which try to shut down a conversation, like boys will be boys, that's how the cookie crumbles, you can't win them all. You know, stuff like this basically ends the ongoing conversation and absolves the person from further critical reflection. There's also denial, which is simply deny alternative views before even considering them. Ignorance is the decision to stay uninformed about certain information so that you don't have to take a position on it. Conformity, that is to adopt the view that is popular or the majority view in order to fit in and not stand out. And then struggling is endlessly debating which view or position to take and never even reaching a conclusion. So kind of perpetual, never-ending struggle over what's the right action or the right view. Okay. Now, there are different types of narrow-mindedness, which were also mentioned there in chapter 1. They talked about these things: absolutism, egocentrism, ethnocentrism, and anthropocentrism. So first of all, absolutism. That is the view that authority figures know everything and they cannot be challenged, and you just absolutely place total trust in everything they say. Of course, sometimes authority figures can be wrong, and you owe it to yourself to be a little more scrutinizing even over the pronouncements given by self-professed authorities. Next up, egocentrism. That's the belief that you are the center of everything and better and smarter than other people. So if people don't agree with you, then you just don't have very good respect for their views. Ethnocentrism. That's the unjustified and false belief in the supremacy or superiority of a person's race. There's absolutely no scientific or genetic basis at all to think that phenotypical traits that manifest themselves in skin or eye color or whatever could possibly affect a person's intellectual or moral capacities. Anthropocentrism, the view that humans are the center of everything and that the non-human world and nature and the animals don't matter as much. Maybe we are a little bit more advanced and more special than the animals. I think that's a fair point. But if we don't have any regard or respect for the ecosystem that we live within, then we could, of course, harm it in a way that undermines our own standing on this planet. And then rationalization and doublethink. Rationalization is when you do something impulsive without really having a good reason. But then later on, after the fact, you try and invent a reason that sounds more logical. So you do some impulsive thing, and then people ask you why. And you don't say, oh, I just randomly did it. You try and invent some kind of solid reason that makes it sound like you really thought about it and deliberated over it first. And then doublethink is just to believe two opposite things at the same time. So you're kind of caught in a contradiction in your thinking. So that's the stuff from chapter 1. Now we're on to the material from chapter 3 and chapter 4. So chapter 3 is all about language. First question that it asks in the notes here is what is language? Okay, so language is a system of communication, clearly. I'm using it right now to just communicate with you the information from the study guide. So there's a couple of different ways that language can be used to communicate. It's a system of communication that involves symbols, and the symbols of language could be of 3 specific types. One are verbal symbols, like talking, speech. That's what we're doing here. Other times, language uses written symbols, like what you see here on the board. That's the written word. There's the spoken word, the written word, and then there's also body language and nonverbal communication, like hand signs of sign language. So it's a system of communication involving symbols that can be spoken, written, or nonverbal. Okay. Different functions of language. These functions of language mentioned in chapter 3, they're a lot similar to the stuff that we already talked about earlier, different types of sentences. But anyway, the informative function is when one uses language to produce statements that are either true or false, so basically to assert things. The directive function of language is to use imperatives to command people or influence their behavior. The expressive use of language, I don't know if we spent much time on it, but it's basically the use of language to communicate feelings and emotions as seen in like poetry or song lyrics, but not really to make any specific claims nor to instruct a person to do anything. And then there's ceremonial language, which is language that is used in specific formal situations like wedding ceremonies or court proceedings or oath of office and stuff like that. Okay, now we talk next about denotative and connotative meaning. Denotative meaning is meaning of a term as you would see in a dictionary. So it just expresses the basic essential attributes of the thing without any positive or negative spin being applied. Connotative meaning, though, is based on past experience and associations, and it can be either positive or negative in connotation. So a lot of times slang use of words involves the connotative meaning of the term. Like the word cool can have a positive spin or a negative spin if used as slang, but in terms of denotative meaning, it more would refer to the temperature of a specific environment or object. Okay, stipulative definitions, guys. So these are definitions that are given to what kind of terms in the language? New terms that emerge in the language. So when new technologies, social practices, or just ideas are brought forth, words have to be established to refer to those things. So, I mean, the word internet, for example, didn't have any meaning, and you wouldn't see it in any book 100 years ago. But eventually we developed, the World Wide Web, and so we had to have a word for it. So that would be a stipulative definition of the term internet and other words like that. Let's see, there's also theoretical definitions. Those are just definitions of terms in the world of science. Okay, so the definition of scientific technical terms like force or mass or gravity or inertia. There are operational definitions. So what is an operational definition? It's an attempt to utilize some type of boundary or threshold to create standardization of terms. For example, we have to have a definition of adult that can apply to all people equally. So we just set down the barrier that after 18 years, you're considered to be an adult, which is defined operationally at the limit of 18 years. To evaluate obesity, there's a BMI number. Above a certain threshold, the person is considered obese. So of course we can use those types of concepts to define things operationally. Then a persuasive definition. That's just using a definition to convince others to agree with your point of view on something. So usually these are to be treated with a little skepticism because they might reflect a bias or a certain skewed view of something. If a person told you that taxation is theft, then they don't like the idea of tax and they're just trying to get you to agree that it's bad and wrong. If they told you that private property was theft, then similar. They're trying to argue that the acquisition of wealth and capital is somehow improper. So, be a little bit careful around the persuasive definitions that people make because in some cases they're trying to prevent you from coming to your own conclusions. Okay, then we talked about criteria for evaluating a definition, all right? And in the book there were 5 criteria that were mentioned. Who could remember some of those different qualities that good definitions would have? Maybe you could just tell me about that. So good definition should be like what? Like what features should it have? Not circular, good. So that means what? That the word should not appear in the definition of the word. Okay, good. Another thing is that a good definition, so it shouldn't be circular, right? Also, what else? States all the essential attributes, good, doesn't leave any of them out. Omar, good, is neither too broad nor too narrow. So it neither includes more stuff than it should nor fewer things than it should. Eduardo, yes, it should not be overly complex or technical. The definition should not use terms that could not be understood by the person hearing the definition, and it avoids emotional language. So yeah, let's see. Neither too broad nor too narrow, states all essential attributes, not circular, avoids overly technical and complex terms, and avoids emotional language. Good. So those are all 5 of the qualities mentioned there. Then the question was asked, what are these different rhetorical devices? It says 5. In my mind, I'm not sure if I can remember that there were 5, but let's talk about the rhetorical devices. One type of rhetorical device, so this is the use of language to, in a way, manipulate or shape people's views. Sometimes people use the rhetorical device, which is called what? Can you tell me one of them? What is one of them? Okay, hyperbole and euphemism, I see those 2 mentioned. So let me cover both of those. First of all, yeah, hyperbole is simply exaggeration or overstatement. So if you said, being at home like this, I'm just dying. I mean, I'm so bored. I feel like it's killing me, In that way, talking about boredom as a condition that kills a person is not being literally honest. It's just sort of to emphasize and over-exaggerate and heighten the sense of, disinterest and boredom. Euphemism is okay, good. So euphemism is when a person tries to make something sound better than it might really be by replacing a negative or neutral word with a more positive sounding one. So, an old person becomes elderly. A tiny apartment becomes cozy. An old car becomes a vintage or a classic or a retro car. Sounds better than defining it or describing it, labeling it the other way. Okay, there's also, yes, dysphemism, and that's the opposite of the euphemism. That's where a person tries to make something sound worse through the application of a negative sounding label in language, which would replace a positive or a neutral one. So those no longer are cigarettes, they're cancer sticks. You're no longer paying your inheritance tax, you're paying the death tax. Yeah, so that would work fine. I mean, I was thinking of another euphemism actually in my mind, body bags. Sometimes they call these transfer tubes in the military because that sounds a little less grim, I guess, than the body bag. But that's a euphemism. Okay, so sarcasm, right? Sarcasm is the use of irony, ridicule, or taunting to create disapproval or to make fun. And oftentimes a sarcastic comment is one where you're saying something, but the sarcastic tone of voice or context is supposed to make it clear that you don't literally mean that. So if a person, let's say, got a bad grade and someone asks, how'd you do? They'd be like, oh yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I got an F. Clearly they don't really find it awesome or, enjoyable. But by putting that sarcastic spin on it, you kind of get the sense that they're trying to, in a way, ridicule the outcome. But we shouldn't over-rely on sarcasm because sometimes people won't even know what we're serious about anymore. So I feel like sometimes a lame excuse when someone calls you out for an offensive or rude comment and you say, oh, that was just sarcasm. Well, if it was so obvious to know it was sarcasm, then no one should have been offended by it. So if you have to keep apologizing for the things you say by noting sarcasm, I mean, that's not very good communication. But in the right company, when everyone's in on the joke, it could be fine. Okay, and then finally, yeah, deception. Deception is simply an attempt to mislead or misinform, but there are two types. There's active and passive. Active deception is to deliberately say something false. So like, if I don't know, I shouldn't even put that out there because someone will get confused. I was going to say if someone tried to lie to you about the time of the final, but I don't want any false information to circulate about that. So I don't know. You're hanging out with a friend that your parents don't like, and they're like, who are you with? And you're like, I'm not with anybody. Now, in that case, you're lying, and that would be active deception. Passive deception, though, would be just holding the information back and not saying something which is true in order so that a person doesn't learn the truth. So it's withholding truth instead of saying something false. If your parents told you you shouldn't spend time with that individual and they never did check in on you and you spent time with them, if you just never brought it up to the parent, that could be considered passive deception because it's like a lie of omission. It's not something where you actively stated something false. Okay, so that takes us up to the last question in chapter 3, which is just what are these 4 communication styles? Okay, so if you all remember, there's 4 that we talked about. There's aggressive, passive, assertive, and passive-aggressive. So first off, aggressive communication is all about a person who just wants to get their way no matter what, even if they end up hurting people, offending them, destroying relationships. So that's aggressive communication. Passive is like the opposite extreme, where the individual wants to avoid confrontation at all costs, even if they end up being ignored and being a pushover. They'd rather that than have confrontation or bring issues up. The assertive communicator is a good middle ground between those two. They will tell you openly and honestly what they want or need. So they're not going to hold back, they'll assert themselves, but also they don't want to hurt people, so they know how to keep it civil and to hold back if they thought they might be crossing a line and actually doing damage to the relationship. And finally, you have passive-aggressive, which blends the first two together. That's the person who, like the aggressive individual, they want to get their way. But like the passive individual, they're not so comfortable talking about what they want, so instead they resort to indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way in the situation. Okay, so that's everything of chapter 3, guys. Now the only thing that's left from the first half of midterm review is the material of chapter, 4? I think, yeah, chapter 4, the knowledge chapter. So first of all, what's knowledge? If you remember, there are 3 conditions that are built into the description of knowledge, and they are justified, true, belief. Now we've already mentioned true and belief earlier in today's review, so I can leave you with that. But justification is just having reasons or evidence to support what you believe. It's like the premises of a logical argument if they're good premises. So when you know something, you think it's true, that's believing it. It actually is true, that's the truth requirement. And third, you can back it up with some evidence. Okay, So exactly, you believe it, it's true, and you have evidence to prove it. JTB, justified true belief. Okay, what's rationalism? That's the view that most of our human knowledge comes from abstract ideas and reason. So think of knowledge that we have about stuff like math or just pure logic or geometry, not about the world per se, but about formally defined concepts. So that's rationalism. Opposed to that is empiricism, which says that most human knowledge comes from 5 senses and observation. So it's rooted in what we can see, taste, touch, hear, and feel, not in just abstract ideas of like number and stuff like that. What is evidence itself? Well, evidence is just anything that could prove or disprove a claim. And what are some reliable sources of evidence? Next question. They include things like direct experience, memory, inference, and testimony that you get from other people. So those are some sources of good, reliable evidence for the most part. At the same time, memories are sometimes false. What is false memory? That is when a person thinks that a given thing happened, but either it didn't happen at all or it didn't happen in the way that they seem to remember it. So that's a possibility. That means we should always be a little bit skeptical of the full accuracy of our apparent memories. 4 qualities that can be used to evaluate an expert's testimony. You guys remember that? So there was the education they have, like what level and where they went. There's their expertise. How much time have they spent working in the field itself, not just their education. There's accomplishments. So do they have honors, awards, publications that give further credibility to the expert? And then there was reputation. How are they regarded? What is their standing reputation with other people that are also in that same professional field? Okay, so those are 4 qualities: education, experience, reputation, and accomplishment. Then it asks you a little bit about 2 different sources of unreliable evidence. So one is anecdotal evidence and one is hearsay. Anecdotal evidence is evidence that is based on one person's personal experience, and therefore it is sometimes biased or unrepresentative of what the case is generally like. So anecdotal evidence is bad evidence usually. And then there's hearsay, which is evidence that has come to you, but it has already passed through several other people on the way to you. So hearsay is oftentimes like gossip or rumor, and then by the time it gets to you, it's a much different version of the actual events. So you should be skeptical about hearsay or anecdote. Okay, then the CRAP test, C-R-A-A-P. The book mentioned this as a way to evaluate the quality of a piece of info. So each letter stands for a different metric of evaluation. C is for, do you remember that? What's each of the letters for? C-R-A-A-P. Just you could tell me spell out the words that form the acronym, and then I could quickly just run through what they're all about. Currency, yes, and then R for, okay, currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, purpose. That's all 5, exactly. So currency means what, how recent is this information? Is it dated or is it up to date? Exactly, yes. So we got our C. Letter R is for relevance. Is this information related to the subject of interest? The first initial letter A for authority. So who gave this information and what is their level of expertise on that subject? The second A, accuracy, and that's just basically, is the information correct and true? And then P at the end for purpose. Why was the information generated? Was it to inform or to make profit or to indoctrinate or what? And so that's the 5 letters. Different research resources, ways that you can, or places that you can go to seek information for research. So there's the library, there's the internet, there's declassified government documents, there are academic and professional journals, and then there's also just like the dictionary or encyclopedia. So different sources a person could and would use to study any given topic. Okay, so then it talked about the War of the Worlds broadcast and what it showed. So back in October of 1938, there was this radio show that was supposed to just be a dramatic reenactment of a science fiction novel involving the plot line of Martians invading the planet Earth and taking over. Some people tuned in too late. They thought it was really actually a news report, and they got into a panic, and even some of them reported delusions as though they were seeing these approaching spacecraft. And it reminds you that social influences can definitely distort or shape the character of what you think is true or perceive. So be mindful of the influence that social influences have on you. Memorable events error. That is basically giving too much importance to events just because they were rare or uncommon. So placing more importance on something than it does deserve just because it was a rare or unique circumstance, like thinking that you're more at risk flying than driving based on the safety record of planes versus cars. Of course, nowadays we have other concerns about flying that have to do with transmissible diseases, but I think you understand that example. Okay, so misperception of random data. That is when a person thinks they can see order or a pattern in something, which is essentially actually just random and disordered. Probability error. That's just giving the wrong estimate of the probability of an event by a significant margin. So thinking it's likelier to happen than it is, or thinking it's less likely to happen than it actually is. And gambler's fallacy could be an example of that, when a person who's gambling is thinking the next hand is hot or whatever, or I should switch because of the law of averages. They're confounding the probabilities associated with a series of trials with an individual trial. Okay. Self-fulfilling prophecy, everybody. So that is when a person expects something to happen, and because they expect it to happen, they end up doing things that causes it to happen. So when your expectation of an event ends up leading to it happening. Okay. One of us, one of them error. That is when individuals divide human beings into groups of us and them along whatever lines: race, religion, educational attainment, income level, whatever, and then treats the people on the other side of the distinction, them, with less respect and concern. Then we just have two more things, okay? Diffusion of responsibility and the Kitty Genovese situation. So diffusion of responsibility is when you're in a group setting and you don't feel individually responsible to do anything or to take any action. And that idea or attitude can become widespread throughout the group, so nobody does anything or does take an action, even if it was important. So, somebody's choking and there's 10 people around that all know how to do CPR, but they just watch and wait until someone else does it, thinking, if I'm in a group of 30, why do I have to act? There's a lot of other people. But everyone with the same attitude might fail to act, and therefore nothing gets done. Kitty Genovese is a real case. She was dying because she's getting attacked in her apartment over in New York, and she was crying for help. And a lot of people nearby in the close quarters of the apartment did hear her, but they neglected to help under the assumption that so many others were hearing her that someone else would do it. So sometimes you got to take individual responsibility for action, even when you are in the presence of others, and to remain independent-minded, even in groups. And then the last thing was the Asch experiment. Can anybody say just a word about what this Asch experiment was doing? What was that one? So it's not Milgram, it's not Zimbardo, it's Asch. What was Asch's thing? Asch said, let's test the level to which people are conformists, or the degree to which they'll conform to others. How was this test administered? What was the basic question they were being asked to answer? The Asch study, the Solomon Asch experiment, and that's our last thing for today. It was tested for conformity, and it was the one about lines. Yeah, so basically they had a standard line here, and then they had 3 comparison lines over here. And they just said, out of these 3 comparison lines, A, B, and C, which one matches the standard line to the left? Now, in this case, I hope you can see that it's actually B to be the correct answer. But in the experiment, they had coached 4 other individuals to all give the same wrong answer as though it was so obvious. So in this situation, it would be like persons 1 through 4. When they get their time to answer, they say, oh, it's C, 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 definitely C. And then the 5th person who's not been coached and who's just giving their honest answer, the researchers were looking at them to see, well, what will they choose? Will they give the same wrong answer as the other people, or were they going to give the right answer, which you could just see from your eyes? And unfortunately, yeah, like 3/4 of the people that were in the position of the last response did give the same wrong answer. And in reasoning later, asking why they did that, a lot of them said, well, I started to doubt my own vision, because if 4 people all said the same thing, how could I be the only one that really got it right? So it just reminds you once again that you will sometimes question your judgment, even your visual judgment, which should be pretty obvious, when it's put under pressure by contradictory views in your social environment. So again, social environment can definitely influence and affect the way that we form our beliefs and the judgments that we make. So that's everything from the first half that we did today. I just wanted to quickly, zoom through all those topics with you again. For Wednesday, that's when we're going to go over the second half of the study guide, the one that I mailed to you guys today. So you can look at that study guide. You can get your notes prepared for Wednesday, and then we'll just have one more review session. It should go, pretty well, and then we'll be ready for the final on Monday. So anyways, then, guys, I guess I'll let you go. Let me know if you had any kind of questions. Yeah, no, Juliana, I fully understand that, and I'm very sorry. It's almost like a traumatic thing, right, to have an imposter that just assumes your name. I mean, they just saw your name, and they just thought, well, that's a name that perhaps I can assume to troll this professor or whoever the person is that's doing the YouTube live cast. That's not nice, and I'm very sorry that happened. But let me just tell you, I've heard much worse horror stories from other colleagues of mine, people coming in and trolling the Zoom meetings or YouTube live sessions with like racist and crazy sexist commentary. So I'm very happy that has not happened to us. I can't wait for us to get back to face-to-face meetings to eliminate the possibility that could ever happen. But just so you know, if it was a problem and it continued, then I could always establish a private unlisted link so that the only people who could watch this particular live stream would be people who I give the access link to. So I would be able to do that. But I thought it would just add another obstacle to your easiness getting into the live stream. But I have a backup plan ready in case that ever did become a problem. In our case, fortunately, we've reached the end of the semester and we only had one small incident just today. But I know fully well, Juliana, you wouldn't have said that. Although I was kind of shocked at first, but I was able to deduce the correct conclusion because I could see that the avatar of your name is blue and theirs was orange. And it would just seem so out of character and completely without basis that I could tell that there was just a little bit of inference that I had to make. So not to worry. And anyway, guys, have a great day. I'll see you guys back then on Wednesday. Take care, and I'll see you then. And by the way, Jessica, did you really mean that you actually did have this particular illness? If so, I really wish you the best in a totally serious sense. And I hope that you get everything that you need. And we're all here as a community to support you or anybody else that's going through any hardship, health, financial, school, or otherwise. So take care, and I'll see you guys back on Wednesday. Okay? Bye-bye.